I wasn't being nosy. Honestly, I wasn't. That morning, I was just trying to print a few documents for my upcoming charity event. My laptop had died overnight, so I grabbed Ethan's. It was sitting right there on the living room desk, open, screen glowing softly. I moved the mouse to wake it up, and that's when I saw it. A folder on his desktop titled Future Plans. It wasn't something he usually named files like. Ethan worked in finance. His folders were always full of numbers, client names, and deadlines. But this one looked personal. I told myself it was probably something harmless. Maybe notes, maybe a travel list, maybe even a surprise for me. But curiosity has a quiet power. It whispers, not shouts. So, I clicked it. Inside were 3 files. One said, a proposal strategy. The second said, a timeline. And the third said, a Natalie's exit. My heart stopped for half a second. I didn't even want to open it, but my hand moved before my mind could stop it. Inside were typed notes, bullet points, short and cold. Start distancing emotionally, 2 months. Keep accounts separate. Talk to lawyer, private line only. Change house deed before she notices. File when inheritance clears. Make her look unstable if needed. It took me a full minute to realize what I was reading. He was planning to leave me. No, worse. He was planning to erase me. I sat frozen, the air thick and heavy. My pulse echoed in my ears. This was the man who told me I was his piece. The man who kissed my forehead every night before bed. The man who still texted me every morning, a good day, love. He was playing a game I didn't even know I was part of. But the thing about games is, I learn fast. I took photos of everything. Each page, each note. I saved them to a cloud account Ethan didn't know existed. Then I shut the laptop gently, exactly as I'd found it. When he came home that night, I smiled. I asked about his day. I laughed at his jokes. I even made him his favorite lemon chicken. He had no idea that the moment I saw those files, something inside me changed. I wasn't scared anymore. I was awake. And if Ethan thought he was the only one who could play this game quietly, he was about to find out how wrong he was. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because my mind was awake in a way it hadn't been for years. While Ethan lay next to me, snoring softly, I stared at the ceiling, memorizing every word from that file. Keep accounts separate. Talk to lawyer, private line only. Make her look unstable if needed. Every sentence was a move on a chessboard. And if he was playing chess, I was done being the pawn. I slipped out of bed, quiet as a whisper. The moonlight brushed the edges of the hallway. I opened my office door and sat down at my desk. My hands were steady when I started typing. New folder. New parsword. Title, A Project Phoenix. Inside it, I saved every photo I had taken of his files. Then, I began making my own notes. Simple, factual, unemotional. Step 1. Secure personal accounts. Step 2. Identify assets in joint names. Step 3. Back up all digital records. Step 4. Act normal. Always act normal. I read the words over and over again until they didn't scare me anymore. By morning, I had a plan. When Ethan came down for breakfast, I poured his coffee and smiled. He looked up, kissed my forehead, and said, "You're up early." I just couldn't sleep, I said softly. Too many things on my mind. He nodded, oblivious, and walked out the door humming. The moment the door clicked behind him, I got to work. First, I called my accountant, not the one Ethan knew, but a private one I had used years ago when I ran my design business. We spoke briefly. She didn't ask questions. She knew my tone meant this wasn't casual. Then, I checked every joint account we had. Slowly, carefully, I took notes. What was in my name, what wasn't, what could be separated quietly without alerting him. Next, I made backups of everything. Emails, texts, documents, property papers, even old messages from his business partner. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. When I was younger, before Ethan, I had built a small design studio out of my apartment. I had clients, contracts, people who trusted my eye. When Ethan and I got married, he said I didn't need to work anymore, that he'd take care of things. At the time, it sounded like love. Now, it sounded like a warning I never noticed. What he didn't know was that I had never closed my company completely. It was still there, quiet, small, under a different name. I had used it only for side projects and donations. But that company was mine. Legally and financially. That afternoon, while he thought I was out grocery shopping, I met with my old business lawyer. We didn't talk in her office. I asked her to meet me in a small cafe 2 towns over. No names. No papers. Just words and understanding. She listened quietly as I told her everything. When I finished, she nodded once and said, "Then we'll move carefully. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Just clean." It was exactly what I needed to hear. From that day forward, every smile I gave Ethan was part of a plan. Every dinner conversation, every soft laugh, every hug before bed, they were all rehearsed moments of calm. Because he couldn't know yet. He had to believe I was blind. The more confident he felt, the less careful he'd be. And the less careful he was, the more I'd see. The first few days were easy. I smiled. I cooked. I laughed when he told me stories about work. And every night, while he scrolled through his phone beside me, I pretended to doze off. He thought I was half asleep. But I was wide awake, watching. I started small. When he left his phone on the counter, I noticed a second email app. The icon was hidden in a folder labeled Utilities. I had never seen it before. One night, when he went to shower, I opened it quickly and took photos of everything. There were messages from someone named Daniel P. At first, I thought it was business. But the more I read, the clearer it became. Daniel wasn't just a friend. He was a lawyer. And he was helping Ethan figure out how to transition assets quietly. They even had a shared folder in the cloud titled A Phase 2. The latest message from Daniel read, "Once you move the last investment, you can file. She won't have grounds to fight back. Timing is everything." I didn't feel angry anymore. Just focused. Every message, every date, every file, I photographed and saved. It wasn't revenge I was building. It was protection. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became more confident. He started dressing better, smiling more. Sometimes he'd make little jokes about how people change when money's involved. Once, he even said, "I'm lucky you're not one of those women who take me for half." I just smiled and said, "Of course not." He had no idea. What he didn't know was that, By then, I already had access to everything: his accounts, his backup drive, even his secret credit card statements. He wasn't as careful as he thought. He used the same password for most things: the name of his first dog, followed by the year he graduated. A creature of habit. When I finally opened his private drive, I didn't know what I'd find. But what I saw made everything suddenly clear. Hidden among spreadsheets and PDFs were scanned documents. One showing an apartment lease signed under his name, in another city. Another, a contract to buy property under a shell company. And one last file titled, A Proposal Budget, or M. When I opened it, my chest went tight. It wasn't for me. It was a plan for someone else. A woman named Marina. Expenses listed: jewelry, travel, moving fund, a new start. It was all there, in neat, labeled cells. That night, when he came home, I set the table for dinner. He kissed my cheek. I asked how work was. He said, busy, but good. Things are looking up. I smiled. Good, I said softly. You deserve it. He didn't notice that I meant it differently. He deserved every part of what was coming. Later that night, when he fell asleep, I opened my laptop again. I added everything to my folder: screenshots, bank logs, photos, copies of messages. Then I opened a small box in my drawer. Inside was a flash drive. I slid it in and copied every file. The drive's label was simple: NG02. I sealed it inside an envelope and wrote one name on the front: my lawyer's assistant. If anything happened to me, she'd know what to do. The next morning, I placed the envelope in my purse, next to my keys. Then I stood by the window, watching Ethan drive away in his black SUV, sunglasses on, looking like the man who thought he'd already won. He had no idea that every time he smiled in the mirror, I was smiling too, but for a different reason. He thought he was the player. He didn't realize he was already the game. The strange thing about pretending is, the longer you do it, the easier it becomes. By now, I knew exactly how to smile at him, how to laugh at his stories, how to tilt my head in just the right way so he'd never question me. Ethan believed what he wanted to believe, that I was still the woman who needed him. He didn't realize that woman was gone. And what stood in her place was something colder, sharper. Over the next month, I built my plan piece by piece. Every move I made had two meanings: one for him, one for me. When he mentioned a business trip, I encouraged it. When he said he'd be away for a few days, I smiled and packed his suitcase myself. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I opened my laptop and began setting traps. I installed a small voice recorder under his desk, one that synced automatically to my cloud. I placed another inside the car, hidden beneath the driver's seat. Then, I made one final move: quiet, invisible, and irreversible. I transferred a portion of our joint savings into my business account. Legally, it was allowed. Strategically, it was survival. When Ethan returned 3 days later, he didn't notice anything different. He was relaxed, too relaxed. He poured himself a drink, told me about his meetings, and left his phone on the table. That was his mistake. While he showered, the phone buzzed, a message from Marina. Miss you already. Hope she didn't notice anything. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Not out of pain, I was past that. It was disbelief, that he could still underestimate me. I took a picture, then placed the phone exactly where it had been. Perfectly aligned. When he came out of the bathroom, he smiled at me. "You okay?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "Just tired." He nodded, walked past me, and poured another drink. He didn't see my reflection in the window, the faintest curve of a smile forming. Because by then, I already knew what was coming next. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told her everything. We planned it quietly, strategically, every document, every date, every asset. She said, "You've already done most of the work. Now, you just need the right moment." That moment came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, Ethan invited some friends over, old colleagues, business partners. I stayed in the kitchen, listening through the wall. He talked loudly, confidently. He said things like, "You just have to know how to manage people. Especially the emotional ones." They laughed. I didn't. That night, after everyone left, I checked the hidden recorder under the bar counter. It had captured everything, every word, every brag, every self-incriminating detail. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about proof. By the time the sun rose, I had everything I needed. In a quiet folder on my laptop, titled simply I saved the full collection: voice recordings, documents, photos, texts. Then I sent a copy to my lawyer. When she called back, her voice was calm. "Are you ready?" she asked. I looked out the window, at the morning light spilling across the lawn, at the life I was about to walk away from. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm ready." That night, I cooked his favorite dinner. We ate together, laughing, talking, pretending. And as he reached for his wine, I looked across the table and said, "Ethan, there's something we need to talk about." He smiled, unaware. He thought he still held the power. But what he didn't know was that this was the last dinner we would ever share as husband and wife. He looked up from his plate, a fork halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" I set my napkin down gently beside my wine glass. For a moment, I didn't speak. I just let the silence stretch, heavy, careful, perfect. Then I said, "I know everything, Ethan." His hand froze. The room went still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Quiet is stronger than shouting. It leaves no space to hide. "I know about the accounts," I continued. "The apartment. The transfers. The lawyer. Marina." His eyes flicked toward me, not with guilt, but calculation. Like a man scanning the exits. He laughed once, low and dismissive. "Who told you that?" "No one," I said. "You did." I reached under the table, lifted my phone, and tapped the screen. The recording played, his voice, crystal clear, bragging about how easy it was to manage emotional people. For a second, I saw it, a flicker in his eyes, the moment he realized this wasn't guesswork. This was evidence. I pressed pause. "Do you want to keep pretending?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. He just sat back, lips tightening, the confidence draining out of his face like color from a photograph. I leaned forward slightly. "Tomorrow morning, my lawyer will file. The accounts are already separated. I've made copies of everything, and they're not just with me." He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him with a look. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm just informing you. There was something almost tender about saying it that way, as if I were offering him mercy. He stood up suddenly, pacing. "You think you can take everything?" he snapped. I looked up at him calmly. "No. I don't need everything. Just what's mine." He stared at me, breathing hard. And for the first time in years, I saw it, not anger, not dominance, fear. Because deep down, he understood something. He wasn't losing money. He was losing control. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You planned this." I smiled faintly. "I had to." He stared at me for a long moment, the kind of silence that weighs like confession. Then, finally, he said, "You're colder than I thought." "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe I just learned from you." I stood up, gathered the plates, and walked them to the sink. Behind me, I heard him whisper something under his breath. I didn't care enough to listen. When I turned back, he was still sitting there, staring into his glass as if it might offer him an answer. "I'll be gone in the morning," I said quietly. "The house will be yours. For now." Then I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway, and into the night air. The sky was clear. The moon bright. I stood in the driveway for a long time, breathing, just breathing. It didn't feel like freedom yet. It felt like silence. And sometimes, silence is the first sound of peace. As I got into my car, I looked back at the house one last time. For years, it had been my prison. But tonight, it was just a structure, wood, glass, and memories that no longer held me. When I turned the key, I felt it, the steady hum of something new. Not escape. Not revenge. But return. Because I wasn't running away from him. I was simply coming back to myself. 6 months later, I woke up to sunlight on white curtains. No alarms. No footsteps. No tension waiting at the edge of the day. Just quiet. I live by the sea now. It's a small house, one story, pale walls, wide windows that open toward the water. I keep the windows unlocked. I like when the wind comes through. Most mornings, I make coffee and walk barefoot to the porch. The air smells like salt and something clean. Sometimes, the tide comes in close enough to touch the steps. There's a rhythm to life again, soft, unhurried, honest. No pretending. No secrets. The first few weeks after I left, I thought I'd feel empty. But the truth is, peace doesn't come with noise. It arrives quietly, like dawn through glass. I started working again, designing spaces for women starting over. Not just the furniture or the color of walls, but spaces that breathe. Places that feel like second chances. Sometimes, when clients tell me their stories, I just listen. Because I understand what it means to lose yourself slowly and find your way back silently. I never spoke to Ethan again. Not once. The papers were signed. The accounts settled. He tried to call, for a while, but eventually, the calls stopped. I didn't need closure. I already had it. Closure isn't an apology. It's peace without permission. Last week, I found the old flash drive, the one labeled ENG02. I held it for a moment, then threw it into the ocean. The waves took it without a sound. And standing there, watching it sink beneath the surface, I finally understood that some truths don't need to be carried forever. They only need to be faced once. As I walked back up the beach, the wind lifted my hair. And for the first time in years, I smiled, not the practice kind, but the kind that reaches the eyes. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it just breathes. And sometimes it sounds exactly like your own name, spoken softly in your own voice. When you finally remember who you are.